I'll hold off on the how do you know you've written out all of them
Right.
until
Oh, okay.
until a
Yeah,
later
yeah.
point, unless you want to get to that now. But
Yeah, that's a really good thing to talk about. And this is something that could probably be pretty directly applicable for Kirsten as well. And so I think the best way that I can talk about this with triads, or not necessarily, not like with triads as in three chord shapes, but as in bar chords, open chords, chords that only have one, three, and five in them. Um, so um, I'm going to use a more complex example, which is with like jazz chords, where there are, maybe more than six notes in the chord. And so you have to choose which notes you're going to play on the guitar because you've only got six strings, you
yeah.
know? Okay. So I tried to be exhaustive about this during like my first semester at Oberlin, and I literally filled up like, I mean, pages and like hours and hours and hours, afternoons of me just writing out every possible chord shape and finding relationships between patterns and like scales and different things. And then I heard that John Coltrane was into this book that's like a thesaurus of musical scales and modes by Nicholas Slonimsky, who was like a music theorist who like was suggesting materials but was like not a composer. And it's cool that John Coltrane got something from it because for the most part that's not a useful book. It's like trivia. Other than that, like, oh cool, Kirsten's read it. Yeah, Coltrane made it cool. But that book on its own is only cool if you're John Coltrane or if you're thinking on that level. John Scofield read it too. Yeah, a lot of jazz musicians have read it. It's become important because people have figured out how to apply it. But for me to explain why I have mixed feelings about that book, I'd have to get into like 20th century contemporary classical aesthetics, which is not what we're talking about right now. But anyway, I mapped out tons of those on the guitar. I was just mapping everything out. I was like, I'm gonna learn how to do this. I'm gonna figure out how to play jazz. That was a big part of it, was that I was trying to play jazz at the time. Okay. And so I just wrote out tons of stuff and I still didn't hit the back wall of what I could do. And from that, I learned a really important lesson, which is that one, it's really cool to see how much stuff exists. Um, Two, when we're thinking about applying this, instead of sort of being like theorists of the fretboard, but actually like applying these things, um, realistically, you can get a lot done unless you're like the sort of jazz guitarist who's just like this musician Ted Green. I don't know if you know Ted Green, or like a Lenny Bro. Ted Green. I'll just drop the name of this book in the chat that does this thing that I'm gonna have some thoughts about. Um, this book's called Chord Chemistry by Ted Green. Yeah, Kirsten knows Ted Green. Uh, Kirsten is a young jazz guitarist who's rapidly covering ground, which is super cool. And Kirsten's read that book. Okay, so you can just infinitely go in that direction. I have an acquaintance who's doing that kind of thing. His name's Jacob Peck, and he's a really cool guitarist. But the thing is, and for me, this I obviously like. I mean, I know the guitar and stuff. My creative project isn't really just about chord voicings on the guitar. And at a certain point, I had to make that distinction, you know. And so here's how it works for me. When I was learning jazz voicings on the guitar, I reached a very, very useful sort of threshold when I was able to take a mode, let's say the D Dorian mode, and I was able to learn one chord voicing per note in the scale per string that I was trying to play the scale on. So here's what that looks like. Okay, and sometimes I have multiple options, you know, but so for D Dorian, I want to play, let's say I'm going to play D Dorian ascending on the B string. Okay, so what I would do is figure out a series of chord voicings where I could harmonize every note in that, like in that scale on that, or you know, in that mode on that string set with a D minor 7 voicing. And so I would have something like this. Or you know, I actually, you know, there were some other cooler voicings that I figured out that I like you know, this is actually an E minor 7 voicing, but in a jazz context. You can slide back and forth, kind of McCoy Tyner style. So sometimes I'll just do this, which is not really, or which is not the exercise, but it's fun in actual music, you know. So anyway, so maybe you pick up more than one per voicing if you're looking for some really, or per melody, if you're looking for some really crunchy chord voicings. But basically, once I was able to do that, I was able to play chord melodies on that chord, on that string set. And so then I would do that for the high E string. And these voicings are a little bit basic. Like, I'm sure that people who have been really studying jazz harmony on the guitar for years will be able to go way beyond that. But for me, that was a useful threshold for learning, in this case, D minor 7 voicings. And by extension, minor 7 voicings in any mode. But so the way that I'd practice it is, practicing them ascending and descending like scales. But then I'd also improvise with it. So for example, let's just say I'm just improvising over this D bass line. And so it's like I'm improvising a melody, but I'm switching between chord voicings. And obviously, I wasn't able to do it that fast right away. But when you just start off by playing it like a scale, eventually your hands are going to be able to move between chord voicings as quickly as they, move between notes in a scale, with some exceptions, because you're moving all of your fingers, but you can eventually build that muscle memory. And so for me, doing that with minor 7 voicings, major 7 voicings, dominant 7 voicings was enough to really set me up to be able to do pretty well in like a jazz context. And so then if we move this back to like just simpler kind of triad based harmony context, then we have fewer options because we have fewer notes to choose from. But we also, we have fewer notes to choose from, so you can cover a lot of ground more quickly. So that's kind of like a bigger picture answer for how I would approach this. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think it gives me a metric at least
Yeah.
of maybe not. I don't know if it's like exhaustively provable, but it certainly seems enough. Like if I can get to that point, that's like functionally, well, more than I would ever use in my own contexts.
Totally.
But that seems like that's at least a like it gives me a finishing point. I think that was the thing that I was lacking.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. And I just want to say that when you get beyond this, once you have all of these voicings and you're looking for more voicings, the amount of difference in sound that you're able to like eke out is pretty small. Like at a certain point, the fact that we're listening to a guitar playing a minor 7 chord, maybe with a 9 or with an 11, like no, like there are people who dedicate their whole lives to finding all of the magic and all of the difference in something like this, and that's really cool. But for a lot of other purposes, you hit a certain point where it's working, and there are other musical considerations that you might want to focus on. And so that's another just functional metric. And when you're learning the instrument, it's cool to go really deep into it and have a period of time where you're really like blown away by it. But a few years out, like I personally don't like. I mean, I have so much respect for Ted Green, but I also don't need to be Ted Green because I have other musical goals. So yeah, I want to talk about how to do this with triads now. Okay,
Cool.
so because you're in phase 2, you're going to start approaching some of the triad material, which is also kind of restricted. It's not exhaustive. It's enough to get people going. And I pretty much just focus on triads on the top 3 strings, like this string set. So like, basically just these 3 triad shapes for major chords. You can do it on other strings, but something that you can do. Wait, I'm just paying attention to how much I'm saying. So really quick, have you looked at the triad section at all yet? I don't think that you have, and there's no need to have. But I'm just figuring out where you're at for right now.
I'm partway through the Arl skills.
Oh,
So
nice,
I
cool.
think I don't think I've gotten to the major triads part yet. Or maybe actually wait, no, sorry. Just looking at what I've actually checked off here.
Oh yeah, I guess entering the world of triads is still in phase 2.2.
Yeah, okay, yeah, no. So I've practiced some of these things. I think the part that I didn't do is the part where that involves writing stuff out and then practicing it because that
Right.
was
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So a chord progression that I use with students, as you know, is just the A major 7 to D major 7, because that just gets people thinking over 1 and 4 and starting to experience the difference in harmony and stuff. But there are a lot of ways that I'm sure this could apply to music that you're actively working on and performing as well. And so something that could be really useful is applying that I totally would recommend doing, that is basically the way that I practice, is like applying some of these ideas from the like linear improvisation stuff, um, but to using triads for a chord progression that you're already playing. And I want to explain how to do that. So, is there like a tune with like a pretty simple set of chord changes that you're, or, of chords that you're playing, that you could recommend or that you could talk about? Like it could even be like, I'll give you an example, which is like, in bluegrass, like Monroe's hornpipe. It's just G C D, basically G C D G.
yeah.
Like I could use that as an example if that.
Let's
Yeah,
go with that. Most of the stuff that I've been working on has honestly been most like been melody focused.
yeah, yeah,
So, and in which case, like the chords can be as simple as you want them to be because nobody's written them in.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so,
Okay, cool. That's also cool because that's like the openness to harmony that exists in Irish music and stuff is really, it's pretty crazy because like the chords that you play are part of your sophistication as a player, like the types of, which
yeah,
is just so crazy because there aren't many types of music that are like that. That's really cool.
it took the entire concept of improvisation that I was used to from like a lot every other realm of guitar and put it on its head where it's like, wait, no, I don't have changes to play over. I have a melody that I need to make the changes for. And
Yeah, that's
yeah,
really
but
cool. Yeah, okay, so if we use Monroe's hornpipe as an example, we're just trying to play G, C, D, G. So we can try doing that with bar chords. Yeah. So all these things are options. And a way that you can do this is like, if you set up like a metronome or something so that you're dialing in the rhythmic challenge, and then you limit the parts of the fretboard that you're working with. Um, and then you can literally just play, half notes because the chords change every 2 beats. And so what you literally do is just try to play through, basically just playing G, C, D, G, G, C, D, G, and just trying to create, just trying to discover, basically, like when you're doing the linear improvisation thing, where you're trying to basically keep yourself entertained and you can use tempo to sort of dial in the challenge. You can just do this with chords and just keep cycling through chord voicings. And then, in the case of chords, if you get bored, then you might need to figure out more chords, or more chord voicings. You're already doing a bunch of cool, sophisticated stuff here. I've seen some inversions and stuff with like the third and the bass. So that's really cool. So yeah, this is just a way that you can practice cycling through those. And then like practicing linear improvisation with lines, you might notice there are regions of the fretboard that you're avoiding, for example. And so in that case, you can be like, well, why am I avoiding that? And if you slow way down, then you're like, oh, it's because I just don't have the muscle memory. Or maybe you're like, oh, it's because I don't have any chords there. And then can I figure out some chords and then practice them in there and expand that part of my knowledge? And so this is, yeah, so you can do this with bigger chords, which are the types of chords that we're talking about. But you can also do this with triads. And like with actually little triad shapes, that are selections from the bigger bar chords. So, for example, check this out. I'm just going to play, G, C, D, G, G, C, D, G. and so on. And so then where that gets really cool is like if you're using those triads, for example, to play lines. So also I'm kind of just being like an information pressure hose right now or something and just like sending tons of info up. But I just want to give an example of what you can do once you start using these triads to like once you start arpeggiating them. Or I'll use 4 notes per chord. I skipped to the second G at some point, but uh, and so basically you start to find all these different pathways to connect um, G, C, D, and G again. And then, and I'm going to get a little bit philosophical here, but I think this was one of the big breakthroughs for me. What we're practicing, this might be like way too much, but what we're practicing is really becoming rather than being. So when we're looking at all these voicings on the guitar and we're just looking at like what is, we're focused on just discovering all of these properties, which is cool in the abstract. But if our goal is to make music, then what we really want to do is figure out how to create a dynamic relationship between the things. And so what we can do with them becomes more important than what they are. Or becomes more important than all of the whole catalog of what exists. And so that's kind of the other thing is like what can happen when you get these three, or sorry, I just saw the number 3 from Kirsten's message. Once you start to get these things in motion, you're going to find a lot of combinations that have a lot of power that just one chord at a time might not necessarily have. And so, yeah, I think that's a frame for thinking about it that can be very useful. And when I first encountered this, it was in this sort of like jazz guitar education, sort of like machismo. Like, I don't want to be somebody who practices in my dorm room all day. Like, I want to play. And there's this sort of like weird, like kind of masculine energy to it that it didn't speak to me at all. But for me, as like a person who reads philosophy and stuff, being like, oh, it's about like becoming and like dynamism and like what a chord can do instead of like the transcendent properties of the fretboard. That was a frame that worked for me. I'm a pretty kind of like heady person, so that's a lot of info. But how's that sounding for like figuring out how to expand your chord voicing language?
Yeah, I think that resonates. Having different kinds of identities is another concept that I'm used to from I think math, I guess, which is not a field that I'm that well versed in, but like having like there's like structural identity, which is kind of what you're saying with the transcendental like emergent properties of the fretboard, but then there's also like I forget what it's called. Maybe just like functional identity, I guess is how you would say it. And these things are related, but yeah, focusing on one, it can definitely help if you're getting stuck on the other.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also looking at the list of all the things that exist, it's like if that feels like what's freeing because it's breaking you out of a box, which is maybe you're very comfortable with your hands really fast playing through a set of chord progressions or playing with a set of chord voicings that but like you're not playing anything new and you're going crazy. That's a great time to start looking at all the options. And so I think what I'm really getting to is like the function of looking at all the options versus getting those options to start flowing and being able to use them in time in a musical context.
Yeah, I think maybe I don't know if there's like any books written on the neuroscience of guitar, but like we talked a little bit about it earlier with like just how to absorb information, how to structure it, and then ultimately how to access it when you really need it. And then like the deeper levels of like creativity with like how do you mold it into something new maybe. But yeah, I think that's a lot of the value that I'm looking for and also finding with this course is
Cool.
like maybe it's guitar therapy. I don't know. So it's something along those lines because it's ultimately the hangups are not around like the information itself. It's how to interact with it and interface with it.
Totally. Very related to that, actually. There was a concept that I was playing with for a little bit in my teaching that I still like, but I'm not. Um, I don't know. I'm thinking about it less than I was for a little bit. But I was trying to describe my like teaching method, and I was thinking about the phrase like the like dynamic circular guitar method or whatever, or is it something like that? There was another word, but the point is that it's like it's dynamic. Like you have to get the things in motion. You have to be like applying them and finding new relationships between them. But it's also circular in that like you come back to the same things, but your grasp of what you can do with them expands. So I guess it's more a spiral than a circle. Um, Dynamic spiral guitar method. That sounds crazy. Um, but anyway, like so that I think that's all really built in. It's like, and this is a major issue with maybe not so much with tabs, but with like books that just have tons of information going on like forever. It's like how do you um, make that like dynamic? How do you make it move? How do you internalize it? How do you begin to make music with it? How do you incorporate it into your vocabulary? And then maybe a step beyond that, what are those sounds really saying and what musical contexts are they going to be effective in? If you're playing in a rock band and you're playing minor nine jazz chords, that could work really well or it could not quite fit. So there's like all these questions of flavor and like style and stuff, but that's another conversation. But anyway, yeah, does that make sense as like a framework for getting the things moving?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And that's also something that I was stuck on. Like I got I forget which course it was, some online course that they did go through and like assiduously mapped out every single chord that exists that is humanly reachable on guitar. And I'm like, great, there's no way I'm gonna memorize this.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's that having it like making sure that each little bit actually connects to the core that's already built up before just like saturating it with stuff that's not going to stick definitely makes sense from a didactic standpoint.
Cool.